You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
Today, Swiss watches, particularly the handcrafted mechanical variety, lauded for their precision and pedigree, have become synonymous with luxury. You may not know this, but Britain was once the cradle of fine watchmaking. In fact, in the 17th and 18th centuries, pretty much every concept that you find in a modern Swiss watch was developed primarily in England. Over the past decade, watchmaking in the UK has come back in a big way and giving their Swiss and German counterparts a run for their money. One British luxury watchmaker, Bremont, has been in the forefront of reinvigorating the nation's horological past when it launched its collection of highly developed aviation-inspired timepieces in 2007 after 5 years in development. My guest today on the luxury item is Nick English, co-founder of Bremont Watch Company, which manufactures its mechanical watches in Henley-on-Thames, England. He and his co-founder brother Giles have made a substantial impact on the watchmaking industry in a very short period of time. The Bremont watch family comprises a range of chronometer-tested chronograph and non-chronograph watches, including a number of special edition models, and remains true to its original principles of aviation and military and British engineering and adventure. Bremont watches are sold all over the world through high-end jewelers and Bremont's own boutiques. The brand has won numerous awards and has attracted celebrity clients such as Tom Cruise, Harrison Ford, Tom Hardy, and Orlando Bloom. Welcome to the luxury item, Nick.
Well, Scott, thank you so very much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be on it.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to have you on. It's so much exciting news coming out of Bremont these days. You know, finally you have a proprietary made in England watch movement, new longitude LE collection watches, and your brand new watchmaking facility, the Wing, which we'll talk about these things, but I'm catching you at a good time. A lot of good things going on there.
We try, Scott. It's true. This last year and a half, we haven't really been standing sort of still. We really have been running around trying to do as much as we can, but it's sort of part of a longer dream we've had for a while. So yeah, it's a perfect time to actually have this conversation, really.
You know, for our audience who may not know Bremont, the Bremont name and the company's origins really stems from a fascinating story. Would you mind sharing the story of how the brand came about?
Of course. So so I founded the business, my co-founder of a business, my brother Giles, back in 2002. But I guess if you had to look at, you know, where the brand began and where it started, our passion, it would have been with our father in the workshop many years before. And he was a wonderful man, incredible man, sort of read engineering aeronautics at Cambridge, where he did his PhD in it as well. So he's a great mind, but also he's amazing with his hands. And so our time in the workshop will be spent restoring old planes, cars, motorbikes, but also clocks. And that was a big passion of his. And the other passion, and you can see the sort of bit of the DNA running through the brand, is this aviation as well. And we're all sponsored through university by the Air Force, but he did a chunk more than us, really, and did a lot of air show flying. And weekends would be dragged along to these air shows, and it was sort of one of these practice air shows. My brother and I got into flying in a big way in our teens and early 20s, and then it was during one of these sort of practice air displays in 1995 where I had a sort of nasty plane crash with my father. Something went wrong with the aircraft, and we ended up crashing it, and he sadly died in it, which is pretty awful. And I smashed myself up quite badly. I was in intensive care for quite a few weeks. And I think Giles and I, we see that as a sort of a bit of a tipping point in our life. Our careers changed, enormously at that point. And life suddenly became very, very short. And the passions that were being sort of instilled in us through our father and just a sort of general love of engineering and things that went with that, suddenly were set off in motion, I guess, shortly after that.
You know, most watch brands are started by people with personal interest in watches, and we already knew you were a passionate aviator. So before starting Bremont, what was your interest in the world of horology?
It was purely sort of, I suppose, hobbyist, really. I mean, my first foray into it was sort of talking to our father a lot. and seeing him restore these old clocks in our workshop. And he had an incredible, knack and passion for doing that. And we'd talk about the history of British watchmaking, which you alluded to earlier on. And so that was all ingrained, and he had a lovely collection. Well, lovely to us in terms of they meant so much. Nothing particularly special, but some lovely vintage mechanical watches, which we used to talk about and look at. And there's nothing more important as a little boy as your dad's watch. Really, it means so much to you. And so that was one part. But also, my father was this engineer. My grandfather was this incredible heart surgeon and inventor, and invented the ventilator and things like that. And I remember one of my first school projects at the age of 12, and it was to design a time machine for the whole school. Was sort of into this competition, and 99.9% of people came in with a plastic bottle with a hole drilled out the bottom and timelines up the side with water running out. And I came with this massive, great mechanical clock with a big fan on it and cogs and gears. And I think that was just the sort of where the passion really started from those two guys, really.
Did it work, Nick?
It was accurate. Okay,
the time machine.
We had to be accurate. It's a 5-minute test, and I think I was 3 seconds off in 5 minutes, which for a homemade thing in your garage isn't too bad, is it?
Britain has been building watches and clocks since the 1500s and have made some groundbreaking discoveries, yet it has not been widely recognized as a watchmaking nation. Other countries like Switzerland have taken the lead within the watchmaking industry over the course of the centuries. How did British watchmakers let that slip through their hands? Was it just the Swiss were just better at branding?
I could talk for hours about that. Should be a whole nother podcast because I'm quite passionate about that, Scott. But what happened? Obviously, as you said, the 15th, 16th, 17th century, we had the whole conundrum of telling the time at sea and Greenwich and the first chronometers, and a lot of the innovation, 50% of the innovation in any mechanical watch came from British shores. And the turn of last century, 50% of all clocks and pocket watches and things came from the UK. So there is this amazing history. But I think a couple of things happened, two major things. One was we didn't adapt. For us, we had this worshipful company of watchmakers where, it was laid down by King Giles, and you had effectively a warrant to make watches. And if you weren't up to the standard, you'd have this taken away and you weren't allowed to make them. And so we always had this artisanal approach to watchmaking where you got a handful of incredible watchmakers making a handful of watches a year. And we're very, very good at that. And we still see it today in the UK a bit. What the Swiss did, which was something we just didn't really adapt to in the UK, was they took the sort of Henry Ford model of cars to watches, and they said, actually, we can make a fine watch, but actually want to make it in numbers on an industrial scale. And they were very, very good at that. And the designs changed slightly, so they're easier for manufacture, for T0 to T3 assembly, all these sort of things. And again, the British didn't adapt that much. We had brands like Smiths who did it, but they finally died out in the early, I think it's 71 when the Quartz Revolution. And the other big thing, obviously, which it's easy to forget about, but we went through 2 world wars.
Right.
And if you could build a firing pin, sort of movement for a watch, you could probably build a part for a rifle, an airplane, a tank, whatever was needed at the time. And then there's the Depression and the Second World War, and it was a fight for survival. And the Swiss did a remarkably good job making watches for everyone, didn't matter, irrespective of country, and remaining quite independent. So they did a very good job, and they are very, very, very good at marketing with it.
Now entered Nick and Giles English. So your goal from the outset was really to bring watch manufacturing back to Britain.
Yeah, Scott, we set, so when we started, and I remember how it happened. Giles and I, for our sins, we both thought we were going to go into the Air Force, and there's a 3-year waiting list to join the Air Force, to fly anyway. After this, going through it at university, and for our sins, I went into the city for 3 years. So I said to my dad, I've got to do something semi-constructive. And when we left that, we literally had this sort of passion to try and understand what was needed to build a watch brand. we went to Switzerland with a blank sheet of canvas, and we tried to understand what it would take to build a watch the first time. And it was a lot of, there's a lot of secrecy, a lot of unknowns involved with watchmaking. And it was us going out there to try and really discover what was needed to do it. And we're still learning to this day. If you look at what we're doing in the last few years, it's a chunk of it's been with the help of Switzerland, but finding the right people who are willing to share this IP. And we're absolutely adamant we have this sort of intellectual property in the UK. But again, there's still a chunk more still needed to do. Yeah, I mean, it's a no mean undertaking, really.
Today, the world's best luxury watch brands are clamoring to deck our wrists in aviation-inspired timepieces that not only serve as reliable companions up in the sky, but also look dashing down on Earth too. IWC, Breitling, Timex, Rolex, Montblanc, and many other have pilot watches. What made you think that you can create another aviation-inspired watch brand that would attract a new generation of buyers?
That's a good question, actually. I think, Scott, I hate to say this, but I think the real answer deep down was we believed in the product ourselves, but we honestly did not know how big the market would be or wouldn't be. We felt that a lot of watches, this is in the the early 2000s. So we felt a lot of watches were becoming, especially pilots watches, becoming quite fashion orientated. There's a sort of real trend for oversized watches. And a lot of the military were wearing watches with quartz movements in them. So you'd have these luxury brands that were making mechanical watches, but also making quartz watches. And these are the ones being used by pilots. And I don't think pilots and the military really had a true understanding of what it meant to have a mechanical watch as opposed to a watch with a battery. And Giles and I looked at this and said, actually, if I was to wear a watch, I had to hand down through the generations, you'd want something that's going to survive. A mechanical watch, there's something very, very special about it. There's 86 odd thousand seconds in a day, and you're producing something which is a mechanical device on your wrist, the most accurate mechanical device on the planet, plus or minus 5 seconds, whatever it is, and it's going to last forever as long as you look after it. And we went in with that approach. And our business plan originally, we didn't really know how we were going to sell, but I think we captured this at a time where a lot of these pilots were sort of being force-fed quartz watches. We suddenly said, actually, we're producing something which is quite different. It's designed to last forever, and it is more expensive, but your grandchildren will be able to enjoy it as much as you have. And that was I guess a bit of it, but the other bit was the look and feel. And we had this love of vintage watches, which, whilst beautiful, were obviously due to their age, were less reliable. And it's about, again, producing a watch which you could pick up in 20 years time and it'd still look lovely on the wrist and not a fashion item. I think those are the two main things that we sort of looked at.
So when you launched the brand, where did you recruit the watchmakers from to assemble the timepieces, and how much of the timepieces were created from components made in the UK when you launched?
That's a very good question as well. When we started, it was incredibly difficult trying to find watchmakers in the UK. In an industry that had all but died out, other than the service industry in this country. Where do you find a watchmaker who knows how to set up a watch manufacturing facility, assembly facility, etc.? It was really, really difficult. So we had this sort of approach where, first of all, we recruited two brilliant guys who's still with us, who actually originally came from the Swatch Group with Amiga and companies like that. And we started our first 2 years of Bremont production. First of all, we had a little workshop in Switzerland. There just wasn't the resource or the know-how in the UK to produce watches of the quality we wanted. And because we wanted any good watchmaker, independent watchmaker, to take the back off of Bremont and go, actually, this is a beautifully made watch. We only make chronometers, we only make mechanical watches. And that was really important. But you had to find the right team, obviously, to do this. So to begin with, that wasn't in the UK. So the first 2 years of our production, you can actually see if you find a Bremont watch with Swiss made on the front, that indicates the reason for that is buying a lot of the know-how in Switzerland. They're being assembled there by a very, very small team we put together. But then as time went on, recruited these first two watchmakers with a huge amount of experience between them. We learned how to do all the assembly in the UK and after sales, and they gradually trained up a team below them to do that. But then, it was a sort of picking off parts that we could sort of achieve with time. So the next milestone was case manufacture, and that wasn't really till 2014 that we managed to do that. And we machine these cases from bar to incredibly small tolerances. I truly believe, some of the nicest cases made in the world, because we take it so incredibly seriously. But again, when you started, it was, how on earth are you going to be able to do that? And no help really from the Swiss, because why would you?
Right.
And so we had to get people from the Formula One industry, from medical, and eventually we had a bit of help from the Swiss with, some of the finishing, but only because we bought some pretty expensive machines, and we said to them, look, you've got to show us how to use these things. And then it sort of went on from there. But throughout this whole period, we've been training up people. So we have an apprentice scheme internally. So, if you look at our watch technicians, for example, they come from a whole variety of backgrounds. It might be, industrial design. It may be, we've got someone from bomb disposal. We've got someone from jewelry making. We've got someone from graphic design. They come from people straight from school, and it's, we have bench tests. We test people and their ability to deal with small things and put them together, and incredible attention to detail, and we train from there. And we're the only company sort of members of the British School of Watchmaking, along with a big sort of watch giants, and we take it very, very seriously.
So how did you get global suppliers to care about the Bremont brand?
From relationships to begin with, for sure, and going out there and making the effort, and really trying to ensure that they knew who you were. We weren't just sort of a faceless brand. And so relationships to begin with. And then as time went on, suppliers could see the volumes are increasing. And so you did become a more important account to them, like all businesses, like all supply chains. And then on the machinery side, quite interesting enough, you don't get a huge amount of help when you buy one machine, but when you buy 6 machines, you can actually demand a bit more help. And I think that's how it's happened. And but also, there is a bit of luck involved. We found some incredible forward thinking and also semi-disruptive teams in Switzerland of young, incredibly talented watchmakers who have been willing to help us, because they see it not just as a domain from the Swiss. So we've had this amazing kind of, for example, this movement we've been making. We've had a huge amount of help from Switzerland, but also we've got some incredibly talented people in the UK. So it's just a fusion of Anglo-Swiss working together in the UK, which is wonderful.
Yeah. So how do you differentiate Bremont in a crowded field?
I think the number one thing is the British bit is a big thing,
Right.
But British by itself doesn't mean a huge amount if the quality is not there. So the biggest thing for us was actually, as I was mentioning earlier, for anyone to look at a watch with any knowledge and look at a Bremont watch and go, actually, that is absolutely beautifully made. Finish, case design, the product has to speak for itself without a shadow of a doubt and compete with the best in the world. So that was very, very important. I think we put a sort of stake in the ground, and authenticity was always going to play a big part. So anyone who's interested in the brand can come and literally come to Henley, kick the tires, and see everything from a case being made, from the bar of metal going in to movement parts, jewels being set, movements being put together, watches being tested and put together. It's a huge undertaking. And in a lot of countries and a lot of brands, there are a lot of smoke and mirrors, and you don't quite know what's going on. And I think this openness, this auditability and traceability is absolutely key. And that's one of the ways we've tried to differentiate ourselves.
So who are you making watches for today? Like, who is your customer? What is the sweet spot?
Sweet spot is interesting. I originally, I think we set out saying, look, you're going to get 30 to 50-year-old men are going to buy our watches who, a certain demographic. Obviously, they have to have enough money to buy one of our watches, and also the interest. But then we quite quickly realized that actually, for example, 20% of our business is military, which is a big chunk. So we've done several hundred, I think it's like 450 or 400 something different military units around the world now, several times over for many of them. So that's a unique market in itself, which you can't market to. That's grown very, very organically. But also what's lovely over the last sort of decade, we have a number of our own boutiques around the world, and we sell through a lot of lovely retailers. And you'll have a 21-year-old coming in with their parents for their 21st, and that's very, very special because it's their first, proper luxury mechanical watch. And then you also have a 85-year-old man who comes in saying that this is a watch I've really wanted for a long time, and it sort of slightly blows our mind in terms of the demographic, and also more recently women as well, because we do make beautiful watches for ladies as well as men.
Yeah, and luxury analog watches are making a comeback, and young affluent consumers are seeking simplicity and personalization and transparency when they're choosing their luxury timepieces. So how is Bremont winning over these younger watch buyers?
I think that point you just made there, the transparency, is really, really key. I think they do want to know how the supply chain's been built up. They want to know where the packaging, where the diamonds, if you are doing ladies' watches, or the leather or whatever you're using. They are genuinely interested, and they want to know that it's all not being shipped from countries where people aren't looking after staff welfare, and they can see that at Bremont. You can come along and see every single thing pretty much, and I think that means a lot to them. So that's I think something that the younger generations have quite rightly and been looking into more than perhaps some of the older generations, and I think that's great for business as a whole. I think we also appeal to a market where my dad's worn this watch and my mother's worn this watch for many, many years. And,
Right.
I'm going into a board meeting now and everyone's wearing the same watch. I want to wear something slightly different, a bit more unique and a bit more me. And that's where Bremont comes in. But, we're making, 10,000 watches a year. We're not making 1 million watches a year. And I think that's a big differentiator as well. Those people who want their own personality to come out in the choice.
Yeah, and these young buyers also expect sustainability to be part of any product, including watches. Many companies marketed new watches with recycling, upcycling, or sustainability partnership stories this year. How is Bremont embracing sustainability in the manufacturing process?
Scott, it's so incredibly important. And we have an aim for the business to be carbon neutral at some point. When I say at some point, there's still a lot of work to do, but we've had some proper carbon audits going on, which is very, very exciting. The whole new facility was designed with sustainability in mind. It's all got a living roof on top. It's set low into the countryside. It's got incredible insulation. The way the building's heated, it's heat from the machines is passed around the building and filtered, and it is as sustainable as you really can have for a factory of that size. And then it will be us looking into suppliers and packaging and all the other bits that go with it. But also what's so lovely, Scott, is manufacturing in the UK. We'll have a bar of steel. We're not shipping things continually backwards and forwards as much as many of our competitors are, because it's all happening here on place. It's about local sourcing. We have this thing internally called Operation Bulldog, which sounds a bit corny, but it's basically, if we can find a supplier who will supply us for something we don't make ourselves in the UK, we will try and find that supplier, because why have it shipped from Asia or wherever you might have to go otherwise? And I think this sort of more localized sourcing is going to become more and more important with time, and we take that quite seriously. In fact, we have one guy who does nothing but that in the company.
I want to rewind a little bit. Coronavirus caught many global watch brands entirely unprepared, while other forward-thinking companies fared much better during the worldwide shutdown by accelerating their e-commerce and digital strategies. What were the early days of the pandemic like within Bremont, and how quickly were you able to change your strategy?
I'd be lying if there weren't times right at the beginning where it wasn't quite scary because I don't think anyone knew. Hindsight's a very powerful thing, isn't it? And I think,
right.
and we all know, yeah, well, we did this, that, and the other. But there's a couple of things. One is, we sell through our own stores. We sell through retailers, as I was mentioning earlier. They all closed, overnight. They all shut. We've got stores in Melbourne, for example. And I mean, I think they've had sort of 250, oh no, more than that, several hundred days of lockdown since it began. And it's really hard to run a business like that. But at the same time, we're of a size where we could adapt quite quickly. We have a direct-to-consumer presence, with the military and other bits. So that kept us going, and we made the most of that. But we also used that time quite wisely for a couple of things. One was, we had this new facility which we've only been in sort of 9 months or so, 10 months, and it was it was delayed through coronavirus, but also it gave us time to really move things across and get things working slickly there. So that time certainly wasn't wasted. And then we built a new website which launched last week. We put a lot of time into e-com, and like many other businesses have. So we certainly didn't sit around idly, but it was scary at the beginning. And I think anyone who says it wasn't is slightly lying, because we just didn't know what was going to happen, did we?
Yeah, nobody's prepared for that. And as a founder, what have you learned from this crisis?
I think you've got to look at the longer term a little bit. It's very easy to have knee-jerk reactions, isn't it? And say, oh my gosh, we've got to do this. We've got to, do this with the business. We've got to mothball this, and you realize actually just keep your calm. I think having really good relationships with banks and things like that makes a huge difference. We had incredible support from HSBC, for example, when when everything hit, and we sat down with them and they understood what we're trying to achieve. We were sensible with costs. We cut marketing. Unfortunately, we have to do that, but the business kept on going. And I think keeping a cool head was absolutely important. And we'd have this daily updates with the board of where we were, what we could do. So we certainly weren't at home sunning ourselves in furlough. It just wasn't like that. And what was lovely is we had the right staff at Bremont who also took up the challenge to try and make things work. And you could see the people who had this sort of entrepreneurial streak to them, and they were working out ways of how could we deliver watches to potential customers. How could we have this effectively click and collect going on at our boutiques, which couldn't be open to the general public, but you could open them for people making appointments. So there's a whole load of things that go on, but yeah, try and keep your cool. That was the number one tip, I'd say.
That's a good tip. And it's interesting, in times of crisis, consumers seem to gravitate to brands that speak to the values of timelessness and meaning and reliability. Have you observed these consumption patterns among your clientele?
Yeah, I think what we all saw, which was quite interesting, and I don't think anyone really predicted this. I think if you'd said to anyone, look, there's going to be a global pandemic, loads of people are going to be on furlough, you're going to be working from home if you're lucky, it's going to be all this sort of thing going on, you'd have thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be the biggest recession in history, wouldn't you? Right. I would have thought this, and I have a city background, and I still would have thought that. But actually, what you realized is, again, people adapted. They work from home. A lot of businesses actually boomed during this period. I feel for those in the leisure and hospitality sector, but a lot of the other sectors did well, and a lot of our clients are in those sectors, so they did have money. So as long as you looked after them and we kept the communication lines open, there were still customers of ours during and at the end, which we're very, very lucky and extremely grateful to them for that.
You touched upon this earlier. Bremont has a strong relationship with the British military. Can you talk about that long run you've had collaborating with the military? And what percentage of the total business is with the military?
Yeah, I mean, total business is probably about 20-25% actually. Right. And it's something which, we're very, very proud of. And there's relationships that have been built up there over many, many, many years. It's something you can't really market to, but it's something which it does mean a huge amount. We try and do as much as we can for them as well. We've got a second stage of Armed Forces Covenant, and we try and employ people ex-military if we can. And there's a lot we do with them there. And then 2 or 3 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago now. God, I can't tell now with everything that's happened. But
Right.
probably 3 or 4 years ago, we were awarded a contract for Her Majesty's Armed Forces to supply, the sort of higher end timepieces with their IP on them. So all of the heraldic crests from the Royal Navy, the Army and the Air Force, and being their official supplier was quite a special thing in the history of Bremont. But we've always had this lovely, lovely relationship. I think it sort of stems from Giles and I having dipped our toe in literally for a handful of years at the university days, and just having some close relationships. Giles and I did a lot of flying with people who are in the Air Force and elsewhere, and we've got an incredible team who have built that side of the business, which is based on loyalty, but also a real appreciation of what we try and do. And we're not, we don't do it for marketing purposes. It's done because we genuinely share that passion, and I think that comes across.
So about 6 years ago, Bremont first announced a new partnership with fellow English luxury brand Jaguar for a series of watches. How did that initial collaboration come about? And you've done a few collections together, I believe.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We have got a few wonderful partnerships, whether it's Williams Formula One or English Rugby or Rolls-Royce Aerospace, and there's some really lovely partnerships we've had. But one of the Martin Baker, of course, who make all ejection seats, but Jaguar or Jaguar, as I think they say in America, don't they?
Jaguar.
Jaguar.
Right.
I always get it wrong. They it is something which actually the relationship's gone on for longer than that. So we probably about when was it, 2012, we started working with Ian Callum, and he approached us. We got this call, and Ian Callum was the chief designer of Jaguar, and before that he for a number of years was the chief designer of Aston Martin, where he designed the DB7, DB9, the Vanquish, and some incredible cars like that before going to Jaguar. And he rang us up, and they're doing this incredible concept car for their 75th anniversary. And it was actually the car that was seen, if you watch, I think, Spectre, there's an amazing car scene in that. We've got obviously him driving, James Bond driving the
Right.
Aston Martin, being chased by this incredibly good-looking car behind, and that was the Jaguar XK75, and that was is an incredible piece of engineering. And it had sort of turbofan engines running the hybrid, battery operated electric motors, and it's just amazing piece of technology. And they approached us and said, look, will you help us design the cockpit for us in terms of the dial layout and other bits? And we got involved there. We got went along to their Coventry development office, and there was this amazing car in clay, still at that stage, and all these mood boards with Bremont watches on. And it was a complete honor, considering we'd only been going 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years. And we really hit it off with Ian, and that was the start of, and his design team, of many things to come. And I guess that was cemented into a proper watch partnership later on, and including things that they did these amazing cars, continuation lightweight Jaguars, and we did some watches for those. And Giles and I love our old cars as well. We occasionally sort of try and race them badly and maintain them where we can. And so we have this passion for old cars, and it's sort of, again, it's when you love these things, it's very easy, isn't it, to get into it in a lot of detail.
Some brands have experimented with connected watches, but Bremont has not. Why is that?
I think they're two very, very different things. I think different to the extent where, a lot of our clients wear both. A lot of them won't wear connected. I think we're not a technology company in that sense. We're not an electronic technology company. We're a technology company in terms of, we've come up with some amazing patents and innovation in mechanical watch design, but that's very, very different from trying to compete with Apple. I think to do anything on that side, first of all, you need the passion to do it. And Giles and I don't really share that passion for electronics in the same way as perhaps some other companies would. But also, you're competing with these giants who are just bloody good at what they do. And the third thing for us is we've always had this thing where you're building something for life, and it's not disposable technology. You know, a Bremont watch will last you for decades and decades, forever, for far out last you if you look after it. Whereas this technology is disposable. You buy one, and for a year and a half, 2 years later, you're bidding it for the next thing, and that's not the best thing, I don't believe, for the environment either. But it is very clever technology, and I think they become more of a health thing. So and I also, it's enough being on your phone most of the time, isn't it, without having it on your wrist the whole time as well. But I can see the attraction very much, so why people do like them. And but I just think there's room for two very different forms of telling the time.
You just recently opened the wing. Did you just outgrow the old facility? And what does the wing say about Bremont's long-term goal?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, first of all, anyone listening, if they ever want to come there, so we're about an hour west of London. If anyone would like to come and have a look around, we're Henley-on-Thames on the river. We'd be absolutely delighted to show anyone around if they are interested in what we're doing.
I am.
Yeah, you must come along, Scott. It's quite interesting because you can see the whole process from the cases and the movements. Everything's sort of being made there, which is quite fun. But no, what we did, we outgrew the last places. So we were actually in 3 different locations, and we had manufacturing of cases and parts in one area about 20 minutes away, and marketing, and we had, one location. We had operations, and actually it became a bit like Minecraft. Every time we ran out of space, we'd dump another sort of porta cabin in the field, and it just got but we knew this was going to happen. And actually the whole process from start to finish of building the new facility took 5 years, from design with the architects, local architects, and getting planning. And actually we're very lucky, we had some great support from the local and regional councils, who all saw it as a positive thing for the local community. So we're very, very, very lucky. And then we're delayed by a year or so with COVID. So
Right.
You can imagine building materials and everything like that became a bit tricky. But we're so pleased to be there now, and having everything under one roof just operationally makes such a difference. Just people being able to talk, be able to see each other face to face without driving 20 minutes. And so we're very, very proud and pleased to be in our new home.
What's the production capacity right now?
So we, as I mentioned, we probably make just over 10,000 watches a year, but the facility is designed to be able to produce a lot more than that. It's incredibly lucky. The chap who helped design inside the facility, he had set up 54 different workshops for Richemont over the years. Mm-hmm. So he knew exactly about the workflow. So from that bar of metal, that piece of metal that comes through to making a watch, it's incredible sort of lesson in logistics and operational workflow. And it's and we're very proud of it. It makes life so much easier.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I recently visited the Bremont boutique here in New York, the one on Madison Avenue. It's a beautiful store with an amazing selection of watches, lots of memorabilia, with, of course, the Instagram-worthy, aircraft ejection seat made by Martin Baker. So you opened it back in 2015 as part of your plan to grow the brand in the American market. What has been your experience in telling Bremont's story to the American consumer, and how is that different from other markets?
Actually, I think if we knew the answer to that completely, Bremont would be 20 times the size. It's a really difficult answer to give in one go. But I first of all, we went into the US market in 2008, and the success we had was very much working with some really lovely, caring and knowledgeable local, almost family jewelers. So we started in New York with a company called a shop called Kenjo. I remember them very well. Mm-hmm. And then we went into a few Torno stores, but we ended up working with some really lovely sort of regional stores, and we had a very decent, very talented US manager who would go around and really motivate and teach the different staff in these stores about the brand and what we represented. But it's exhausting. America, you forget, is such a big place. What the Californians think of Bremont is very different from what those in Texas or Ohio or wherever else do. So it's just a very different mindset. And I ended up living in LA for a few months, really trying to help put it together as well. And that helped. The other big part of the market for us was the travel retail. So we had a sort of 25 doors selling our product in the Caribbean, which has done very, very well up till COVID. There's obviously the cruise industry's been put on ice for a while. But no, the message for us, the difficulty has always been marketing spend. And, we look at the giants like Rolex in terms of how much they spend. It dwarfs everyone else, put together almost. And to get a message out consistently to the Americas on a regional basis is incredibly difficult and very, very expensive. So what we did early on, there's a couple of things. One is we're very early adopters of social media back in 2009, 10. With a lot of luxury brands just weren't doing it. Right. So that really, really helped. And we're pretty active on forums and things, which are so commonplace today. But also, we Giles and I are out there a huge amounts. So you will literally be doing event after event and telling the story, because you can't really do it any other way. And then through osmosis, from people traveling, and it gradually grew into it's our second biggest market now.
What does British luxury mean to you?
I think the whole word luxury full stop is an interesting word in itself. And, I think luxury has often been associated with something that costs a lot of money, but it's a lot more than that. It's about craftsmanship, it's customer experience, it's about everything that goes around that. And, you can have I believe a luxury item that doesn't necessarily cost a lot. I think scarcity is part of it. I think if you're buying into something which is so incredibly ubiquitous, is it luxury? But it's for me, it's about craftsmanship and having something where a lot of thought, a lot of detail has gone into it, and where the quality is absolutely second to none.
What about British luxury?
British luxury for me is exactly that. So it's a lot about the design. I think we're incredibly good in this country at design, but also we're incredibly good at taking a concept which has been around for years, or decades or centuries, and changing it. Look at our Bremont cases. They're very unlike most watch cases. Most watch cases are two-part cases where you have the case and the case back. We went for this more of a three-piece case where the tolerances are incredibly tight, but you can change materials, and they just look almost like the lugs are melting over the case. And that was done through, British engineering and trying to differentiate ourselves from others out there. But also that sort of tenacity to make things work. We're pretty good at this country, and we're not, we're making 10,000, we're not making 1 million. Rolex make 1 million watches a year. So we've got a lot of catching up. So there's a huge amount of human interaction that goes into our watches as well.
Nick, my final question, which I ask all my guests, is the luxury item question. So if you were stranded on a deserted island and you could only have one luxury item with you, what would that luxury item be? It can't be any form of air transportation or any transportation or anything that requires mobile service. It's you, a couple of palm trees, the sand and the sea. What would that one luxury item be?
Well, assuming you had a knife or something and that wasn't your luxury item, because I think that you'll be a bit silly not to have one of those, then I think if it had to be luxury, I think luxury is a lovely addition to your daily rigors of life. I think it might have to be a guitar, actually. I think sitting there and
acoustic
guitar, strumming a few tunes would be a really lovely thing to have. And actually, it'd get you through some of the highs and lows of the day. And that would be a luxury. There's nothing like picking up a guitar when you're... Giles and I, have been in a really bad band for about 30 years. And I don't think our repertoire has really improved over the years, but we get so much enjoyment out of it. So I think that would have to be it. But then, if you're trying to get off the island and you're trying to find your way back home, you definitely need that luxury watch as well. Otherwise,
yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming that you probably had a Bremont watch on
your wrist,
anyway.
Exactly, because it is rather essential for navigation and figuring it out.
Nick English, co-founder of Bremont Watch Company. Thank you so much for joining me on the Luxury Item, and good luck with everything.
Scott, thank you so very much indeed. Really, really, really appreciate your time, and lovely chatting.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.